This is Update One, the podcast of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Update One provides a forum for listeners to learn about national and international stories, focusing on journalism and communication issues, news, and politics. Now, the latest edition of Update One.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Update One. This is your host, Shannon Fisher. Our guest today is retired AP reporter Mike Graczyk, and he worked as the AP's Houston Bureau designated representative to witness executions in the state of Texas at their Huntsville facility, and he's witnessed more than 400 executions. So we're going to discuss his career, his experiences, and how he navigated this heavy assignment. Mike, welcome.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And so you've witnessed more executions in the United States than any reporter in history, and the state of Texas leads the nation in execution. So tell me about your first assignment to cover an execution and what you thought as you were walking in and what the experience of covering an execution was like.
I moved to Texas in 1983, came here from Detroit, and I knew when I took the job in Houston that the duties included covering the Texas Department of what used to be known as Texas Department of Corrections, and among those duties, they would be covering the death penalty in Texas. They had already done one execution in late 1982, and I got here in 83 for the second one, and then everyone subsequent to that. But the first one I did was an inmate named J.D. Cowboy Autry. And I remember there was a whole bunch of media. There were a whole bunch of people outside the prison. And I remember walking up the steps. And I do remember that the first time that we went in there to cover one, it didn't happen because the Supreme Court stopped it at the last minute. So we went in and left and came back a few months later, and finally it got carried out. So that was the recollection of the first execution.
Talk about going in with your heart racing and then walking away. So it had to have been. I would imagine that you perhaps were nervous. How did you prepare yourself when you were going to cover an execution? And did it ever reach a time when you didn't need to do any preparation at all?
Sure. You're aware that it's a big national story. It certainly was at the time. So there's a certain amount of adrenaline flowing when you do that. But any emotions you have, you check at the door. When you go in there, you have a job to do, and you remember that. It does you no good when you're in there if you don't remember to do your job. So I had talked to a couple of people who did executions, the few that had taken place. So I had somewhat of an idea of what was likely to happen, and we also had a whole bunch of additional AP staff around. So roughly my duties were to witness the event, and then I needed to write a first-person account of what happened in there. And I also knew that I was as a pool reporter for the entire event. I had to address all the dozens of other media who couldn't get in to see it. So I think if there was any nervousness, it was the fact that I was going to have to kind of hold my own news conference out there and tell other folks what happened.
Sure. And so what do you feel is the press's role in covering executions? I know objectivity is important, and this is a story you're telling about inmates, about crime, about victims. What is the story that the press needs to tell?
You know, it sounds like a cliche, but I think ultimately it's the old watchdog function of the media. It's necessary that we be in there to ensure that the state or whoever is carrying out the execution is doing it properly according to the law, and that there isn't any kind of laughter, lightness of mood. I can tell you that in Texas, it's very, very serious, very somber, very dignified. I once made that remark at a conference, and people who were against the death penalty jumped all over me, saying there was nothing dignified about the process, but they do it with great dignity, and there's no, at least I've never seen any animosity, and it's done very professionally.
Good. I think that respect for the end of life would be kind of paramount. Did you ever face any ethical dilemmas while you were covering a capital case?
I don't think so. That's an interesting question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that. Attorneys will tell you things, and then you take it upon yourself to either check out what they tell you, or inmates will tell you something. You don't run out right away immediately and report what an inmate may tell you, because very often it may not be correct. So you just use your whatever tools or skills you have as a reporter, and you follow through and check and double check and then run with it.
Now, was there ever an inmate with whom you felt an emotional connection as you were going through this process?
Sure. There have been several inmates that you get to know and get to know well. There was one inmate who was there for over 30 years, and over that course of time, you talk to them repeatedly, and you get to know them. You can't ignore the fact that they were convicted of killing, I think, 4 people. So when he's put to death, you're sad about it, but at the same time, you're standing next to relatives of the people he was convicted of killing. So you just have to kind of play it right down the center, and it's a whole lot easier that way.
I would imagine so, yeah. And so, yeah, you're there with, you're in a room with the families of the victims, and the families of the inmate are in a different room, and there are the warden and the people who are conducting the execution. Were there any reactions from those groups that were very similar between cases?
People tend to react differently. I was surprised when relatives of murder victims were allowed in the room. I was surprised that there's been so little reaction. And the vast majority of them just stand there. They're 3, 4, 5 feet away from the inmate, separated by glass, a glass window, and they just stand there and they watch. Now, there have been a couple where there's been some response or reaction. I remember the father of one murder victim walked up to the window, looked at the inmate, and turned around so that his backside was what the inmate saw, and he stood that way for the entire execution. On the other hand, the emotion from the room where the inmates' relatives or friends watch has been increasing over the years. I mean, we've had people beat on the walls, kick a hole in the wall, beat on the windows, just wail. I was standing there one evening and next to the mother of an inmate, and she begins hyperventilating and collapses to the floor almost in convulsions.
Wow.
And you can't, that's not something you can easily forget.
Absolutely. And so through all of these different getting to know families and inmates and reporting on the prison system, did this reporting change your view on the death penalty or really anything involving the criminal justice system?
I think from capital punishment, you get to see how the system works. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that my attitude has changed. That's kind of a loaded question, because it implies that you're either for it or against it. And I've found it just not to anyone's advantage, or not to my advantage, to say that I'm one side or the other. But you see how the system works, and you see where there may be some inequities, or you see how each side kind of plays with the facts. It can be a little disconcerting. But that's kind of how it's evolved. You learn things as you go along. You learn how to read appeals better, and you talk to attorneys, and you see how the legal challenges have evolved and what the arguments are, and how arguments and appeals may not reflect what actually happened at the trial or why things happened at the trials. So I've always found it real fascinating.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so much that goes into a legal case, and public policy plays a part in it. I know federal executions ceased in 2003, and the final federal case was a case that had gone through Texas, and they resumed with an Arkansas case in 2020. The 2020 case was actually impacted by COVID-19 because the victims' families wanted a delay until it was safe for them to travel. So what are your thoughts and perspectives on the ceasing and then the restarting of the federal executions?
Well, I think, there's a law there that says they're supposed to be carried out. And I know from talking to prosecutors or talking to family of murder victims, that one of their biggest complaints, especially among families, is that this is taking too long to carry out the punishment that a jury decided should be carried out. Mm-hmm. So if the federal death penalty is being enforced or being administered, then if people don't like that, they ought to work to change the law. And it goes that way in every state. And we've seen that in some states that have chosen to abolish the death penalty in their states. I know there have been some calls here in Texas. The legislature would have to do that. It does not get very far here. But the fact of the matter is that executions throughout the country have declined over the years. And there are just fewer and fewer people, and probably fortunately, who have been charged or convicted of capital murder, which accounts for the possibility of a death penalty. So the trend line certainly is down, and the courts also have had an impact. The Supreme Court in kind of narrowing the focus of who can and who cannot be put to death in terms of age and mental capacity, and that's where the real kind of battleground is in terms of capital punishment litigation, and when it winds up at the Supreme Court.
Sure. You've covered, you of course get a lot of attention because of your record-breaking coverage of executions, but you've had a very long career as a reporter. So what are some of the other stories and beats that you've covered?
Oh, as an AP reporter, you cover everything in Texas, and I've been fortunate to do happy stories and feature stories and wander this great state, but you also do just the run-of-the-mill, everyday chaos, like plane crashes and hurricanes and chemical plant explosions and business. The SNL debacle in the late 80s, and the energy industry's ups and downs, and sports. I've done pro and college sports as well, so just the full gamut of things. And unfortunately, those tend to make what work you do. Those are the fun things, actually. And I'm not saying that I don't have fun covering prisons, but you don't want. It's not fun to have somebody die. There's a lot of, and if you consider that there have been 570 executions here since 1982, so that's 570 dead people, and you multiply that at least by another 570 victims, and a number of those cases are multiple victims, so sure. That's a lot of carnage.
Absolutely. And through those stories, is there anything that really stands out to you as a significant memory over the years?
There have been inmates. There have been two inmates who said hello to me as I walked into the chamber. I didn't know how to respond the first time. A guy named Bob Black said, "Hi, Mike. How you doing?" What are you supposed to say to somebody who's you walk in and he's strapped down on a gurney and he says hello to you and he asks, "How are you doing?" And then there was another guy who tried to wriggle out of the restraints. There was another person who hid a handcuff key in his mouth and spit it out when the warden asked him if he had anything to say before the drugs began. The inmates have recited poetry, sang songs, speak in foreign languages. Some say they've killed the wrong person. Others have acknowledged the crime, and they pray and they apologize to victims. One inmate made it known that he wanted to tell a joke, and he had offered for sale one of the witness seats or spots if the joke that he'd selected was submitted, by some member of the public.
Wow.
The prison system puts a kibosh on that, but there are all kinds of things that go on. Those are what I remember.
You have had a storied career, my friend. It is. I'm sure you have thousands of stories in that brain of yours. Well, Mike Graczyk, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today about an area of media that probably most people don't even think about its existence. And so you've offered some great insight, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
And for Update 1, this is Shannon Fisher. See you next time.
Update 1 is a production of the National Press Club's Broadcast Podcast Committee. You can comment on this podcast or any episode of Update 1 by sending an email to update1podcast, that's update the number 1 podcast @gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Update 1.